All right, everybody, welcome on into the Auburn Daily Show, episode 9 of the Auburn Daily Show. Man, I cannot believe we are already 9 episodes in. I feel like I've only been doing this for a couple of days now. Anyway, welcome on into the show, everybody. Got a very special guest with us today, Trey Lee, writer at auburndaily.com and also the senior graphic designer at the Pure Game Sports Network. Trey, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I'll say this, and I know I don't like to open with just awkward small talk about the weather, but I think it's important because on yesterday's show, I thought the power was going to go out because it was coming down here in the Auburn area, and then today, beautiful outside, a little windy, but just absolutely phenomenal weather. Really, really excited to get this show going today. Got a really fun topic, and Trey, we've brought you on for today's show to discuss an article that you actually put out back in February. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, I believe it's in the YouTube description below. If anybody watching wants to go check it out, but you put out an article titled 5 Bold Predictions for Auburn Football in 2022. I wanted to go over these 5 bold predictions, just kind of get your thoughts on it, kind of give my take on it as well. I absolutely love these 5 bold predictions. So let's go ahead and get into it. You ready, man?
I'm ready. These are some scorching takes.
And I've said this before on the show. Actually, shoot, I might have said it yesterday. Talking about there was an article released about how Auburn football apparently is boring, according to some survey by TickPick, which is some ticket company, and they surveyed over 1,000 people, and it was just yeah, Auburn football is boring. And I was like, this is not one of those hot take articles that you see of people just saying it just to say it. This was 1,000 people that voted and said Auburn football is boring, and I just couldn't get behind it. But my point being is that I'm like, we don't like to talk about hot takes just to talk about hot takes. But this, I feel like some of these have some legitimate merit to them. I feel like all of these, it's well thought out, and I can definitely get behind all 5 of these bold predictions. I really like them. So let's start at the top here. Number 1, the first bold prediction of the article: Auburn will have its first 1,000-yard receiver since 1970. You noted in the article that Auburn's not had a receiver even come close, essentially, since Darvin Adams did. He was 3 yards shy of the mark in 2009. Just kind of break down your thoughts on who could potentially be that guy to be that 1,000-yard receiver and why you think it's going to happen this season.
So in the article, I said I noted 2 guys. I thought Schenker was obviously, Auburn throwing more to the tight end under Harsin is a big deal. Obviously, everyone and their mother has wanted Auburn to throw to the tight end. So I think Schenker would be the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest person here to note, with the receiver room being a little spotty. The other guy, Landon King, is going to be a huge threat in offense, especially with his new hybrid type role he's taken on. So I think those 2 guys, I don't know. I just think if Auburn can get a really steady quarterback room going, I think some of those dink and dunk yards are going to add up, and eventually you're going to have Tank Bigsby to take some of the pressure off the quarterback, and then eventually you can throw deep to whoever, whether that's Schenker, that's King. I think it's going to help the passing game with the run game.
Right. And you noted in the article, it's you're not necessarily focusing on receivers. Like you just said, you think that John Samuel Schenker and Landon King are definitely going to be big contributors for this team this season. And I agree. I mean, you look at what Schenker did last season, like you mentioned in the article, he broke a bunch of records for the Tigers. And I think that this season, I think Auburn is going to try and look more his way as a safety valve type of guy. And we've talked so much already on this show about Auburn's schedule and how you get your first 5 games of the season at home, and you're really going to be able to develop a game plan, not just with your quarterback, but with everybody. The offense, the defense, you're going to get to really figure things out in a home environment for 5 straight weeks. With the competition progressively getting more difficult, I think it's a great way to set up the schedule for the Tigers this season, especially at quarterback. And like you said, whoever it may be that starts, whether it be more than one guy, I think they're going to be able to work into a rhythm with a couple of these different receivers. And I love what we have in John Samuel Schenker. Also, like you mentioned, really, really like what we have in Landon King, who Brian Harsin said, he's been working out at receiver a little bit, but he really thinks that Landon's going to be a big contributor for the football team this season. I'm excited to see his role grow, especially considering, he's a big target with a big catch radius. We got to see him catch a huge touchdown pass during the 2021 Iron Bowl in overtime, no less. Just this past season. I'm excited to see what those two guys can do. I know that you said you wanted to stray away from receivers, but if there was a receiver to do it, if there was a receiver to get close to 1,000 yards, who would you say it would be?
Phew, that's tough. Man, I want to say Shedrick Jackson, but I just can't bring myself to it. So I'm gonna go Javarius Johnson, just with his speed, and you get a little bit of everything with him. He can run after the catch. I think he's poised to be wide receiver one in this offense.
I do think that Shed would be a safe answer. I like Shed's development. I really hope he's going to be able to really limit the drops this season. I think Javarius Johnson, he's explosive. I think that's a good pick as well. Commenter here, underrated, said under Ike Hilliard improving this wide receiver room, especially the underclassmen here now with guys like Camden Brown and Amari Kelly coming in. Yeah, that's something that I've not thought about Hilliard since we were writing about him and discussing him whenever he first got here. I think that Ike Hilliard is going to improve this receiver room. I think significantly. You look at his track record in the NFL, he's gotten to work with some of the best receivers that the game had to offer at the time. And then during his stretch here with Pittsburgh over the past few final seasons, he got to work with guys like Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson, two guys that were able to step up and contribute during their first couple of seasons with the Steelers. I'm excited to see what Hilliard does. And if he's working with somebody like Landon King, I think that the sky is the limit for this. I think the receiver room is definitely underrated. And I do think that we're going to be able to see some more production, barring a quarterback or quarterbacks completely falling apart. So, man, I'm excited to see. And then he also mentions Tavares Dawson and Jay Fair will surprise many come fall as well. Yeah, Auburn's got some young guys that will need to step up in this receiver room, but I believe that somebody is going to. And then also, again, like we've been talking about, Auburn's got a couple of tight ends in this room that are going to be able to get a lot of different catches.
Really good tight end room, honestly. I don't know how you're going to you got four, and then you got Michael Riley Ducker waiting in the wings. So it's like, what do you do? Like, do you add on? Do you throw them like you're doing Landon King? Yeah. Tarvarius Dawson. That's a hard name to say. He's one that maybe is a little underrated. I was at the Birmingham Bowl and I saw that route he ran, and I was like, good grief, man. Like,
absolutely.
Hope to see him do that this season.
Absolutely dusted him. I think that Auburn's got underrated speed in this receiver room, man. Mm-hmm. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of these guys contribute. Auburn having its first 1,000-yard receiver since 1970, the first bold prediction on this list. Number 2, Owen Papo leads the SEC in tackles. Now, anybody that's been listening to the Locked on Auburn podcast for some time now knows that I have been just a really big fan of Owen Papo as a player. I think he's athletic. I think he's got a high IQ, really talented player. Although, you note in the article, the issue that's kind of held him back is the injuries, and he's not been able to really consistently stay out there on the field. I think that if he's able to stay healthy this season, he's definitely going to be able to contribute. Explain more of the reasoning why you think Owen Papo is going to be able to have that fantastic season.
I think one of the biggest things is he loses his running mate with Zacoby McClain going to the NFL. Zacoby was literally one of the top tacklers in SEC the past few seasons, and I think Owen is just going to come in and take that spot and just run with it. And I think the big thing is he's an athletic dude. He's all over the field, like you were saying. He's going to be able to get guys that are burning you down the field. I think he can catch up to some guys if they're running for touchdowns, like grab them at the end. I just think Auburn has had a really good history the last couple of years of good linebackers leading in tackles. I just think Owen Papo is going to explode this year, honestly. He's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, I think, and that's a big reason for him coming back, and I see him having a huge year.
I definitely think that him having a chip on his shoulder is definitely going to be a factor. And then, I mean, you look at the other guys surrounding him. I mean, you're going to have guys like Cam Riley and Wesley Steiner playing. Eugene Asante, the transfer from North Carolina, is also going to be in that linebacker room as well. Although the thing is, Trey, is that we don't really know a ton about those guys. We've not really gotten to see them on the field. In Asante, we haven't seen him at all here at Auburn yet. I think that it makes sense right now to say that Owen Papo is going to get a significant share of the snaps if he's healthy, knock on wood. And then also you look at what he's able to do. I think, like you mentioned, it's a great point. He's very versatile. I think he can play very well in pass coverage, also get after the quarterback a little bit, stop some runs. I think he is going to be Auburn's most valuable linebacker and one of the most valuable linebackers in the SEC, barring him re-injuring himself or maybe one of these other guys stepping up. And again, like I said, right now, we just don't know a ton about these other guys, haven't really gotten to see them develop yet. I think Owen Papo is a safe bet to have a good season, but then also I think it also makes sense to say he could potentially do something like lead the SEC in tackles. All right. The third bold prediction for Auburn football in 2022, Nehemiah Pritchett has a breakout season. Obviously, everybody knows Roger McCreary, All-American cornerback for the Tigers. He will be entering the 2021 NFL draft. You noted that McCreary is leaving, and that's going to leave some massive shoes to fill. And you believe that Pritchett will be the guy that steps up. Tell everybody why you think Pritchett's going to be that guy.
I think Pritchett has really been underrated these last couple of seasons. You gotta play him at different areas. I really think of the picks he's gotten. I distinctly remember the one he got against LSU last year, and then the one he got against Houston. He's just all over the field, kind of like Papo. I mean, you play him in nickel, you play it outside. I just think Auburn's going to be able to rely on him on the outside to cover the best receiver on the other team. I don't know. I have a funny feeling that it's going to be Pritchett. I don't know. His size matches up well with some of those receivers. I mean, he's 6'2". That's good. I mean, that's good going into that. And so I just think he's going to be really good this season, and I think he's going to shock some people.
I definitely think that that's a great point there, talking about his size and having a little bit of length at cornerback. That's something that I, at times with Auburn in the past, have been a little frustrated. Like, they've had athletes at cornerback. Don't get me wrong. They've had some dudes in the defensive backfield, guys with some really, really talented speed, some guys who are just ball hawks like Smoke Monday, some guys that are really, really physical like Carlton Davis and Roger McCreary, but they've not consistently had, in my opinion, like a ton of size outside of maybe one or two individual pieces. Now, I may be completely off on that if we go and check rosters, but it just feels like there have been times where teams have wanted to throw jump balls on Auburn, and they could, and they've gotten away with it consistently. And Auburn it was always a thing under Kevin Steele. It's just like, don't play your man, don't play the ball, play your man. And they would never look back, and it would be PI. And it was just one of the most frustrating things for me. But I think when you look at Pritchett, I mean, you look at some of his PFF numbers, it was talked about a lot last season, like, hey, this guy's pretty underrated. And you noted there the interceptions that he's been able to pick up during his time here with the Tigers. I think that's a great point, just talking about maybe he was overshadowed by Roger McCreary a little bit. And this could be Pritchett's time to shine. You also know in the article that every time Auburn sent a cornerback to the league, there has been somebody that has stepped up to fill their shoes. You say Jamel Dean, Noah Igbenogany, and Roger McCreary. All three have been really good corners for the Tigers. Dean's breakout season followed Carlton Davis, and then Iggy followed in Dean's footsteps, and then Roger McCreary obviously followed after Igbenogany left for the NFL. Yeah, I definitely think that Pritchett is lined up for a potential breakout season. I'm really excited about some of these other guys in the defensive backfield as well. And I definitely think that Pritchett's going to be at the forefront of that, but I don't know why. I keep coming back to Keontae Scott as a potential breakout performer for the Tigers this season as well. Now, do I think he's going to do I think he's going to get as many reps as a guy like Pritchett or even Jalen Simpson? I don't think so, at least not right now, but I'm really excited about the depth that the Tigers have at this position as a whole. You know, pass coverage was an issue in 2020, a little bit less of an issue in 2021, but everybody knows just Derek Mason and just some of the issues with his scheme and some of the inconsistencies with Auburn not being able to get stops on third down. I'm excited about this unit improving as a whole. What are your thoughts on the defensive backfield this season?
I mean, you covered it. It's going to be a glaring hole without McCreary. There's no doubt about that. But I think bringing back Simpson and Pritchett is going to be huge because not only do you have one guy that's going to fill the hole, you can have two.
Mm-hmm.
I think that some of those younger guys, some of the transfers, like you were saying, are going to have to step up because you're going to need more than two guys to play well in the defensive backfield. I think if Auburn is going to succeed in that room, Pritchett and Simpson are going to have to be elite, honestly, because you look at some of the receivers they're going to go up against this season. It's going to be rough, but they're going to have to hold their own. So I think that it can be a strength of Auburn, but they're going to have to step up.
And I think that's a really good point. And going back to what we were saying about the schedule, I mean, get your first two games at home. I've not looked at Mercer or San Jose State's roster, quite honestly, but you know that Penn State's got Parker Washington, who was an 800-yard receiver last season, really, really talented. I believe that, who is the LSU receiver that I'm forgetting about right now? It's not Chase, obviously, but Keishon Butte, yes, he's going to be back this season for the Tigers. Hopefully, I believe that he's going to be. He's going to be really, really difficult for this room to figure out how to guard. And then also with Missouri, I believe they just signed a 5-star receiver, and they've also already got one in Mookie Cooper, a transfer from Ohio State, I believe, on their roster. I believe he's still there. I may be off, but they've got some receivers as well. So I think this room is going to have to grow up a little bit. And like you said, Simpson and Pritchett, they're going to need to contribute. They're going to need to step up. And I'm excited to see what this room does. I have faith that they will step up, but we'll just have to see. We will just have to see. All right, fourth bold prediction here for the Auburn Tigers. Auburn will have multiple starting quarterbacks during the 2022 season. Now, we are going to talk about this a little bit more on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Daily. In fact, we're going to have the Auburn Roundtable. We're going to have Trey back on. We're going to have Zach Blackerby of the Locked On Auburn podcast. And then we're going to have Lindsey Crosby, host of Locked On MLB Prospects and also writer for AuburnDaily.com. We're going to have them all on the show tomorrow discussing this question and many others. But Auburn right now, like you note in your article, they've got a few guys that are battling it out for that quarterback spot. TJ Finley, Robbie Ashford, Holden Garner, Zach Calzada. But you think that Auburn is going to start at some point during this season more than one quarterback. Explain why.
So I really, really, really hope it's not the situation. I don't remember what year it was, but where Jeremy Johnson, Sean White, and John Franklin III all were out on the field.
2016.
That Clemson game was a nightmare. So I don't think it's going to be that. I honestly could see maybe Finley starting week 1 and then Calzada starting week 2. Or you can get maybe Calzada starts the season, doesn't do well, and then Finley or Ashford comes in or Garner. I just think I know a lot of what you've been saying is like the schedule sets itself up for a quarterback to gain momentum. But if he doesn't in a game like Penn State or LSU, you could use a game like Missouri to try and retcon everything and try to fix things with a different quarterback. So I just think this room is talented, and I think it's going to whoever gets the spot is going to have a good season. But I think the gap between quarterback 1 and quarterback 2 is going to be very, very, very slim. So their leash will maybe a little bit shorter than you would think.
And I definitely think that that makes perfect sense because, I mean, you look at last season, Bo Nix was on a relatively short leash after that Georgia State game. I mean, Harsin doesn't play favorites. He's going to put out the quarterback that can win you the game. And he's not going to play favorites. He's going to try and make the best decision possible for the Tigers. I think that's a really good point. Let's say Zach Calzada does start for the first 3 games of the season. And against Penn State, it doesn't go so well. Then you have a little bit of a quarterback battle that week. You're able to kind of figure out things, and maybe you throw somebody out there for the Missouri game. Let's say TJ Finley goes out there, wins you a ball game. You would most likely then be the guy or the favorite to go play against LSU the following week. So I think that's a really good point. Although, regardless of how it shakes out, I think we can say safely, I'm like, on paper, this schedule does set up well for the Tigers. I think that things do work out really, really well for Auburn. Somebody in the comments here, Underrated, says if Harsin and Keesaw can scheme the offense to our guys' skill sets, we can win the 50-50 games. Games lost previous year, the previous year, I assume last year, were not blowouts than what the scoreboard told. And yeah, I definitely think that Auburn last season, with the way that Harsin and Bobo, the way that things were operated, the way some of the decisions that were made cost Auburn in certain games. And now that he's got an extra year under his belt, I think he's going to be able to adjust. And let's say Auburn played in like what, 50-50 games or something like that last season. And they potentially, I would have to go back and look, just lost all 5. I think I would be comfortable saying right now, Auburn goes like 3-2 or 4-1 in those games. I think they're able to make those adjustments. And we talked on the show a couple of days ago. Somebody asked, what upset do you think is more likely? Home against Penn State or at home against Texas A&M? I'm like, look, I think these are going to be 2 very, very difficult teams to beat. And obviously you probably lean Penn State, but I mean, these are still 50-50 matchups. I think Auburn has the potential to beat both of those teams, but I would lean Penn State, and we dove into that on the show. But I mean, Auburn definitely has an opportunity to make some statements. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier. It's like Vegas thinks that Auburn's going to win 5 games. A lot of people are down on the Tigers. I'm afraid for the future, but I'll say this. We got to see Auburn put up a fight. A 6-7 Auburn football team put up a fight against the national championship runner-up in the Iron Bowl. They took it down to the wire. That may be the hardest effort I've ever seen Auburn put out onto a field. It was really, really impressive. If they can get 4 or 5 of those types of games in the 50-50 matchups this year, I think they can go 8-4 or 9-3. I can definitely see that. They're going to need that effort. They're going to need to find that effort, which is difficult. But I'm going to try and remain optimistic, even though I am a little afraid. But yeah, like Underrated said, Harsin and Keesaw, can they scheme the offense to this personnel? I believe they can. Auburn's got a shot.
Yeah. I mean, it's another year under your belt. You've got more guys that are more battle tested with you. I mean, they're fighting for you off the field and on the field. I mean, if Auburn can string some wins, that first 5 games are going to be really telling. I mean, if you can get you saw this season, Auburn started really well and then couldn't finish the season. If they can get momentum going, I think they could have a better end of the season this year.
I'm genuinely excited. And also something that a lot of people were talking about this past season. Obviously, you don't like the 5-game losing streak to end the season, but if you just get better quarterback play, I mean, in just a couple of different plays, I mean, your season ends like 8-4, right? Like you're able to come out of that relatively unscathed. And then Brian Harsin, he's not on the hot seat. I don't believe that what happened during the spring with the boosters and all that, I don't believe that would have happened. Who knows though? But I think that a lot of people would be way more optimistic heading into this season. And I think there's reason to have hope. Now, who knows? We could go 3-9 and we could be sitting here this time next year, be like, well, guess this is it. But anyway, I've got some optimism. And speaking of optimism, your final bold prediction on the list: Auburn wins the SEC West. And at the very first sentence you have breaking this down, it's like, well, this is a bold prediction list after all. You had to throw a little bit of spice in there. Trey, explain why you think Auburn could potentially win the West.
Obviously, it's going to be really, really tough, like we've been talking about. But if Auburn can nail down that quarterback spot in at least the first 5 games, I mean, the rest of the schedule is going to be tough. But I don't think it's deadly. I really think it's going to depend on Tank Bigsby. I mean, the man has been a really, really big staple of the offense the last 2 years, but it almost feels like he hasn't hit that second year that you've seen guys like Trey Mason and Kerryon Johnson hit in their signature season. So I think Tank is primed for a really, really big season. And I mean, we've already seen reports coming out of spring that it's like, okay, we're gonna this offense is going to be the Tank Bigsby offense almost, and that's going to take a lot of pressure off the quarterback. So I think if Tank hits that next gear and the quarterback situation figures itself out, the receiver room works out with the quarterback as well, and then the defense is as elite as we think it can be. I mean, it could be a special season. I noted in here, like, we had a tough year the year before 2013. It can happen like that, but I think a lot of factors are going to play into that before we can really say yes, Auburn is going to win the West this year.
I think that's a really good point. Just talking about Tank Bigsby needing to be a focal point, and then also we expected him to be a focal point of this offense, and that was part of the issue, I think, for last season. Now, we don't know for certain. I can only sit here and speculate, but it seemed like Brian Harsin and Mike Bobo were not consistently on the same page when it came to how do we utilize Tank Bigsby. There were some moments down the stretch where a lot of fans were clamoring for Tank Bigsby to get more touches. I think a lot of people could have looked at that South Carolina game and said, hey, you could have really used him in some short yardage situations where you instead opted to throw. I think that this season, now that Harsin is essentially the one in control of his offense, I think he's going to be able to let Tank Bigsby ride. Now, obviously, the offensive line is going to be a huge part of that because the run blocking was not phenomenal last season. At least I don't think so. I think that if the offensive line is able to step up their game, there's a lot of experience on that O-line. Obviously, a lot of injuries right now, but we'll just have to see what happens come fall camp. But I think that Auburn is going to need to kind of rely on him. And look, we talk about the beginning of the season for the Tigers and how we're talking about the passing game and getting the quarterbacks comfortable. One of the best ways to do that is by establishing your run game, right? And making some of these teams respect that and giving your quarterback comfortable opportunities to produce through the air. And so I think that Auburn's offense, if they're going to win the SEC West, we all know that Auburn's defense, I think, is going to be better than their offense this season, or at least it looks like that on paper. I think Auburn's offense is going to need to be a little bit more, I wouldn't necessarily say explosive, but I think they're going to need to be a little bit more efficient. And a lot of that has to do with how they utilize Tank Bigsby. I'm excited to see this season, man. And we can also look to last season as a great reason to say Auburn could contend this year. Is because, look, they were 6-2 at one point and right there in the thick of it after they beat Ole Miss. And also, you just look at the conference as a whole. Alabama was down last season. Like, they were down significantly. That may be the worst team that Saban has fielded outside of maybe the 2010 year. Didn't they lose 3 games that year?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of parity in the SEC. I mean, LSU's trying to start things back up. Mike Leach is trying to do things at Mississippi State. Ole Miss has to operate with a new quarterback under center. Is it going to be Jackson Dart? We'll have to see. Texas A&M is throwing out the McDonald's bags for all these different recruits. How that class is utilized is going to be fascinating to watch. And then Alabama, like I said, they had issues on the offensive line last season. How do they rebound after having just a weird season, in my opinion? There were so many close games that they were in that they could have lost. Like, LSU could have beaten them in Tuscaloosa last season, and they kind of blew it at the end. But I mean, they're and then Arkansas is an upstart team. I mean, it feels like Alabama's the favorite, right? Let's not misconstrue this. It feels like Alabama should be the favorite, and I think Preseason Magazine Culture is going to tell you all about that. But Auburn, I feel like, has just as legitimate of a shot as anybody else does in this division to take the cake. And so I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah, it's just going to be, they don't call it the Wild Wild West for nothing. It's going to be a dogfight this year. I think, I mean, each week is going to be a different battle. So, I mean, I couldn't tell you, besides obviously with this bold prediction picking Auburn, like, if you ask me right now, I probably wouldn't have an answer for you who wins the West.
I think an interesting question that we can ask ourselves as well is, like, who's going to finish second? right? I mean, there's so many different teams.
It's going to be 2A, 2B. It's going to be tough.
We're gonna have a three-way tie for second in the West. Everybody's gonna finish like 5-3. But like you could make an argument for LSU. You could make an argument for A&M after having a really good year in 2020 and then a classic 8-4 season as Texas A&M normally does last season. Ole Miss, you could make an argument for. Arkansas, you could make an argument for. I don't know if you could say Mississippi State, but underrated comments here again. Says additional transfers from the spring game is key. Will Harsin and company add their needed depth is the question. And that's a really, really good point. Auburn, and somebody asked this on the show just a couple of days ago, they could probably stand to get a receiver in the transfer portal. And they wanted to get that in Corey Rucker, right? They wanted to get Corey Rucker in the portal, but they weren't able to pick him up. Transfers to South Carolina after leaving Arkansas State. They could stand to get a guy that would produce for them and contribute in a major way next season. I don't know if they're going to find that, but after the spring game, I think we are going to see some more names enter into the portal. Auburn's going to have some options, I think. It's just whether or not they can capitalize on that, and that's like underrated said. Will Harsin add the depth needed in certain spots for Auburn to grow? And I'll say this, and I don't necessarily mean it as a complaint because I think any good recruiting is good recruiting, but like, you look down the line here, and I may just not be looking in the right places, but it seems like Auburn is recruiting a ton of different defensive guys, but they're lacking and they're behind in certain areas when it comes to like quarterback and receiver. They've missed a couple different dudes at running back. They're really going to need to pick it up, not just this year with the transfer portal, but also recruiting down the line in the future. I believe they're going to. That's not me saying that they're not going to. I'm just afraid after seeing a year and a half, 2 years now of what this coaching staff has to offer, but we'll see. It's you don't Rome was not built overnight. All right, Locked on Auburn. Zach Blackerby comments, who is the most natural wide receiver on the team? It used to be Kobe Hudson, man, but he has since departed for UCF. Gosh, the most natural wide receiver on the team. My gut says Javarius Johnson. You could also say Jay Fair because he's going to be wearing number 5. Those would be my two guys.
Yeah, I think you got to get Javarius Johnson. You go from 5, you go up to 6 for natural wide receiver.
He improves, and obviously number 7 retired. But man, if we could get a number 8 for wide receiver somehow next season, he'd be the most natural guy. Yeah, I would say Javarius Johnson or Jay Fair, one of those two. We'll just have to see. I'm also curious to see what Malcolm Johnson Jr. does this season. Got a little bit of height there. I mean, you've got several guys in this room that could pop off that we just simply aren't talking about enough. But and then like underrated mention, I mean, there are a couple of guys coming in, like Amari Kelly and Camden Brown. So we'll just have to see. Favorite Italian dish, dude. This is just Locked on Auburn trivia right here. Hands down, the chicken parm. As we all know, our good friend Brad Larondo absolutely loves crushing chicken parms. Trey, what would you say is your favorite Italian dish?
I mean,
it doesn't have to be chicken parm.
I think I'm going to go chicken Alfredo. Then.
Okay, I respect it. I respect that. I actually also love shrimp Alfredo as well. Just any form of Alfredo, give it to me. Inject it into my veins. All right. I think that's about all we have to talk about on today's episode of the Auburn Daily Show. Trey, you do really good work over at auburndaily.com. Tell everybody where they can find your graphic work, man.
You can go Instagram at _TLee10. I think that's what it is. Just kind of throw some stuff out there every once in a while. Just started a new job at Pike Lib down the road in Troy, doing their graphic stuff. So that's a lot of fun. So yeah, just go give me some love, I guess.
Trey does a really, really good job with some of his graphic work. Zach Blackerby says Cal. Oh, we forgot about calzones. Oh my gosh. Oh man. All right, shoot. Well, how about that? All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Auburn Daily Show. Trey, again, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. I will see you all tomorrow. It's actually going to be me, Trey Lee, Zach Blackerby, Lindsey Crosby of the Locked on MLB Prospects podcast and the Locked on Auburn podcast. We're going to be discussing a lot of different Auburn related questions. It's going to be a roundtable. It's going to be a lot of fun. I will catch y'all all then. Have a good rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.